In public comment. Do we have any announcements or public comments?
Chris, there's also another guest on David Stamatis, Billingsgate Charters.
Yes, I got them.
Okay, and Peter
Right.
Morris.
I have them as, yeah, I have each of them. Yes, thank you. Okay, move on to administrative. So we have tonight, we have myself and Joe and Skip and Kevin and Kurt, and that's it for the task force. We have Janet and Will on behalf of the town. Next item is the approval of minutes of meeting from our last meeting, which was December the 6th. So if you would take a few minutes, take a look at it, and we'll entertain a motion to accept.
I would move that we accept the minutes as written.
Okay, from Kurt, we need a second.
I second that, Skip.
Skip. Okay, we'll go to the vote. Kurt,
Aye.
Kevin,
Aye.
Skip,
Aye.
Joe,
Aye.
Chris, aye. So the minutes are accepted 5-0. Next item is the status and the closeout of the 2021 dredging concerns. So all the dredging was completed prior to the December 31st cutoff. They did return this week, specifically today, and started work to reinstall the piles that had been removed at the start of dredging in order to facilitate the dredging. Looking at it this evening, it looked to me like maybe they had reinstalled about 11 of the piles today, plus or minus. So my guess is that by the end of the week, they will have reinstalled all of the piles, which includes some new replacement ones for the ones that were too deteriorated to reinstall. Essentially all the other equipment has been demobilized. People have probably noticed the scows are gone, the push boats are gone. The only thing left is a push boat Mantis and the snag barge. And then for this piling installation, they brought in a Share 107, which had been here at the beginning. They're using that for the piling, and they have a separate push boat for that, Bill Kickus. So they should be totally wrapped up, like I said, by the end of the week, depending on weather. All right, move on to permit and lobbyists. Joe?
Well, the focus now is on obtaining the permit for Area 2, the mooring field. And that's been an ongoing process. Our strategy is still the same. The Army Corps was looking for $13.5 million in order to allow us to do that. And the strategy of our lobbyists in the town has been to refute that. And we presented strong evidence from our engineer showing why mitigation should not be required. We had sent a letter in September with a list of possible mitigation projects if they wanted to use to incorporate retroactively to help them save face and get what they wanted. That would certainly be acceptable. We never received a response to that letter. You know, I've been at this for 10 years, and throughout that time, including tonight, I've always felt it's important that the issue of full disclosure be on the table. So I want to, in that context, I want to share some information from you. Chris and Will and I, Rebecca, received today some documents from our lobbyist. And I subsequently got a phone call from our lobbyist in Washington, D.C., who's pretty upset. He has been working with our two senators and our congressmen to advocate for us, as well as his long-standing contacts in the Army Corps of Engineers. And what he and we all learned today was that the Corps responded to our September letter with their letter on October 27th. That's a 2-page letter with 27 documents enclosed, pushing us toward formal mitigation and that process. Now, what the lobbyist is upset about was that he didn't know about that letter because it would have altered his strategy. The letter was sent to Will and to our engineer, but it was not shared with Chris and I. So what the lobbyist is saying is it would have altered his strategy to place the emphasis on no mitigation required, no payment. And he also pointed out that we've lost 2.5 months. The letter is dated October 27th. So when he made contact recently with his contact at the Army Corps said to him, why isn't Wellfleet responding to our October 27th letter? So that's what I know about the process. And looking at it from a big picture, as we know from the 2 previous permits that were issued for the channel and for Area 1, it's a very time-consuming process. We really have to have the permit in spring in order to put everything in place, the bidding process, awarding the contract before the good contractors are taken, to hit the ground running in late September and to be ready to dredge. So at this point in time, our lobbyist is requesting that we do 2 things. One, that we ensure that the lines of communication are completely open and that all information in the town is shared with each other and the dredging task force. And 2, he wants to have a conference call with us and our engineer so that the strategy can be agreed upon going forward. That's what I know.
And I would agree with that. We need to have a conference call ideally this week with the parties you mentioned, Joe. I went back and looked at our letter, and the Corps had in their October letter, they showed interest in the Hilda Trust and the Wellfleet Conservation Trust, specifically the 18.5 acres. But they also said there's a shortfall, and Kurt, you're probably even better versed at the ratio for mitigation. But I think we really should, as Joe suggests, we should have that conference call this week and decide what it means, whether we can get there using any of our already existing or already in progress projects to satisfy it.
Now, if I can also
Sure.
add, the Assistant Secretary of the Army was recently appointed and appointed by the President and approved by the Senate. He's a key person. And our lobbyist and congressional delegation has been preparing to meet with him. And the strategy has been to advocate that we don't need mitigation, that we had a very solid case to go forward for the Army Corps to award the permit without any form of payment or mitigation. But what is present now, and the concern of the lobbyist, is that, and Congressman Keating has already talked with that person, the Assistant Secretary of the Army, and Senator Markey's staff has talked with him, and Senator Markey will be talking with him soon. What our lobbyist is concerned about, I think legitimately, is he does not want our congressional delegation to be in the position of being told by the Army Corps that it's going to be mitigation, formal mitigation, not retroactive, but going forward. So that's what we need to head off.
Joe, just on that point, I think a lot of the projects that we had identified, not just Hilda Trust, but there's a whole series of them. Those are forward-looking projects. So in other words, there is a large majority of that list that's planned projects, not retroactive projects.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever reason, the two that they ordered off that menu that you just described, Kurt, it was the Hilda Trust and the Wellfleet Conservation Trust. Out of the many that were in there, Herring River was certainly on that list, Hawes Pond, Mayo Creek, Duck Creek.
So what I'm thinking, Joe, is
they work on a point system, and
Yeah.
the award points for each mitigation project dependent on the size of the project and the impact. And what we learned was that even with the Hilda property and the Wellfleet Conservation Trust, we didn't achieve those 7 points. We're only at something like 5. But I think the bigger issue is, in that letter, it refers to the 27 documents enclosed, which is basically an application for mitigation, and it involves just a tremendous amount of time and work. So I question, even if the engineer started now, I question if he could have that done to satisfy them in the spring.
Yeah, it would take an effort. I was looking at, so far as the mitigation credits, like Joe was saying, it looks like they evaluated Hilda at 100 acres, because in our document we said there's about 100 acres of intertidal, and then 18.5. So they came up with 118.5. Full mitigation in their mind, with their math, is 145 acres, it looks like. So in their mind, there's a shortfall, but again, as Joe suggested, I think the very next immediate step is to have a call with our lobbyists and ourselves We should also, and maybe as a separate item though, figure out just what the effort is to put this together if we decide to go down this path. When you read it the first time, it's totally overwhelming. And it's the second time, it's significantly overwhelming. But we should get some
Chris, what I'm-
feedback from GEI. All of this information exists, but you know, it's can be pretty painful and laborious to parse through it and put it together. But again, I think the first step is what Joe suggests. We have a call with Ray, our lobbyist.
Yeah, of course we got to do that. What I'm wondering is just to try to understand what it is we need to. Dogs chasing coyotes. Sorry about that. What I'm trying to understand is, it seems counterintuitive that, I mean, how many acres are we talking about in area 2?
24.
Roughly 10.
24.
Yeah, and so you would think that if it's 24 acres, we would need 24 acres of mitigation if we were completely decimating the 24 and needing to replace it. So I'm kind of wondering how the formula works that, an acre doesn't equal an acre.
Well, it's more, I was trying to wade through the math, looking at this, but it looks like, it's a ratio. So in their letter, for the two that they showed interest in, it's 118 and a half acres. And they say that would generate 5.925 mitigation credits. Somehow for the 23 acres that we want to dredge, they've assessed the impact as needing 7.16 mitigation credits. So that's where the shortfall is. But what I can't quite tell is how they calculate the 7.16, but I'm sure they have a lengthy formula.
Kurt, what they have established is their formula is based on square footage. And when they deny a permit, they require a mitigation of $14.26 per square foot. That's how they arrive at the $13.5 million.
Oh yeah, no, that's the dollar version. What
Yeah.
I'm saying is I'm not sure how they arrived at our 23 acres would need to would generate 7.16 mitigation credits required. That's the math. It's the mitigation credits that I don't fully understand the math on, but
Just to complete what I was saying, what we learned from our lobbyists years ago was that it is common for these agencies to pursue the dollar amount more so than the mitigation so that they can pad their budgets. So that's something in terms of strategy we have to be careful about, to not feed into the mitigation or the dollar requirement. And we are, by the rule of the Army Corps, we cannot talk directly with them. This is referring to their formula. We have to go through our engineer. Now, I asked our engineer on January 5th for an update so we could have it for tonight. And the response we got back was he's on paternity leave till the end of the month. But we could call him. So I called him and he said he's still working, but from home. And he said, the only update I've got is that the Corps is interested in mitigation of Hilda in the Conservation Trust. But he never mentioned this letter, which I want all of you to see. He never mentioned the letter and the documents. But when you get into it, I mean, they're talking about studies, evaluation, core samples. It's like, it's almost like duplicating the work that has been done several years ago to satisfy the mitigation requirements. That's why I think our strategy with the lobbyist is right on to continue to make our case. We have a solid case that no mitigation should be required. I mean, the black mayonnaise in the mooring field is the same black mayonnaise in the area that they just dredged and issued a permit for.
So I would say for the next step, we should reach out to Ray and see what his availability is for a call this week. Joe, you want to reach out to him, or after the meeting?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And then also after the meeting, I'll go ahead and I'll issue the letter so people can see what we just received.
Now, there's just one more piece to that. I had mentioned to the task force a year ago and to our lobbyists that I grew up and remained friends with Congressman Richard Neal in Springfield. He is the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, probably one of the three most powerful congressmen in the Congress, in the House of Representatives. He wrote a lot of the recent legislation that was passed. And I briefed him on our situation a year ago. And he said, let me know if I can help. I will talk with our senators and Congressman Keating and pitch in. So our lobbyist brought that up today, and he wants me to approach Congressman Neal to have him talk with Markey and Warren and Congressman Keating. He's the dean of the congressional delegation. They have great respect for him. So I'm going to go to work on that avenue as well.
Yeah, do you think you should have that call before or after we huddle with Ray? I leave it to you.
Well, I think we know what Ray's strategy is, unless we tell him differently. It's to proceed ahead, and I referenced that email when I talked with you, Chris, to proceed ahead with, full steam ahead, that mitigation isn't required, that we have a very strong case, which is what Congressman Keating presented last week to the Assistant Secretary of the Army. And the Assistant Secretary of the Army said, okay, we'll review it. I want to talk with my people. But what he doesn't want that Assistant Secretary to hear from the New England District people is that we are totally committed to mitigation, to the entire process, which could delay the issuing of the permit. So he's going to continue to advocate with the Corps and our congressional delegation that mitigation is not needed, that we will give them certainly some ideas, which we already did, if they want to save face and enlist them as ongoing projects, fine. But I think when all of you take a look at that 2-page letter and all the documents and all that's required, I think you'll see what we're talking about.
I'll also send our letter, which it's referenced as a September 20 letter, but it's really a September 17th. So that I know I sent it to everyone way back when, but just in the interest of convenience, I'll send that out with the October 27th. And in that we described various projects that were underway or coming forward. So I'll get that stuff out tonight. Okay.
This is Skip. If people in the community and even on the peninsula of Cape Cod, which has many marinas, both public and private, if they were aware that in order to do some dredging for a town, that there was a requirement from where there was permits involved with the Corps of Engineers, that if they were to have to pay dollars to the Corps of Engineers, and that in their case, they call it remunerations. But I certainly think that it would have a very bad taste in the local taxpayer and the taxpayers across the Cape, it just seems like a outlandish thing for an arm of the government to be demanding to be paid for something when all those payments come through the budget that's put together by Congress, voted on by Congress and the Senate, and that's where the impetus for spending amounts of money by the various branches of the federal government. So
I would agree with you
That's a good
on the
point.
reaction.
That's a good point, Skip. And to further that, when you look deeper at what you're saying, most of those other harbors are not black mayonnaise.
Right.
So they're sand, they can use a hydraulic pump, they can use the Barnstable County dredging unit. We're somewhat unique.
yeah, the Gowanus Canal though has much more of the this what they call custard, really, because that's the toxic material is the mayonnaise. So they have much more mayonnaise than we do, or other towns on the Cape that have a little bit of it. I hear what you're saying, but it just, the very thought to some people's minds, and to the newspapers, is not of that nature that sounds like a good thing. I know that doesn't relate to coming up with an option, but you're right, we have to keep moving forward on a strategy that we've been doing and put some meat behind it, like you're saying, Joe. So we have to watch what we're doing at the right time, but certainly leaves a lot of bad taste in your mouth.
Skip, on that point though, one thing that just occurred to me is Mark Forrest is currently a county commissioner. And obviously Sheila is the other, from Wellfleet and a county commissioner. And I think it's it may be worth talking to Mark, because he was the former chief of staff for Congressman Delahunt. He's very, very familiar with this stuff. But using your kind of argumentation, Skip, or that line to say, look, if the Corps actually pursues this line of logic where they're trying to force the town of Wellfleet to pay mitigation for an area that's historically, been part of the marina, every community on the Cape is at risk. And, if the county were to step up a little bit on this, or at least, we could potentially use them as some more leverage if they were to supply a letter. Politically, I think that could help. We're at the point now where we've really got to start to think outside the box, I think, a little bit too. Clearly, Joe, your contact is going to be crucial, and Ray's advice on how to leverage those contacts. But I'm wondering if Mark could be helpful and if the county could be helpful.
I think that's a good idea, Kurt. What I'd be willing to do is, I worked with Sheila on the parking task force. I'd be willing to talk with her about facilitating that, getting a strong letter from the three of them, and I can give her the documentation.
You brought up a good point there, Kurt, that if we had more than just a Wellfleet issue with the Army Corps to do some permitting to allow for dredging, and we could pick up more supporters for what we're trying to do. So these other towns that may or may not, that need permits to do dredging, like some of them obviously are going to have it more so than what the Barnstable currently, where the county is doing some dredging. That's what
my hesitation on this. My hesitation on this is based on also what Joe had noted. There aren't many other towns on the Cape, I think, that fall into this, because they do the dredging. It's beach nourishment. It's clean sand. They're able to do hydraulic, and they don't fall into the same category, nor do they receive the ransom note from the agency. They just get the permit because the conditions are so much different. So.
Yeah, I'm thinking more legally, Chris, because if basically the Corps is trying to take away land. This is historic. This is a historic mooring field, and effectively they're trying to take away a mooring field, and they're using some tortured logic because of the age of its last being dredged to make that case. So what I'm saying is, I think we have a legal concern here. Obviously, you know, the idea of suing the Corps isn't going to get this thing dredged next fall. But if the county were willing to make some noise about the fact that they look at this as a potential taking, and they're concerned as well, that certainly can't hurt us.
No, I agree.
No, I
A
agree
footnote.
with that, that specific to Wellfleet. All I was cautioning was that we don't want to mistakenly portray all the other towns as falling into this same situation when in fact they don't. But so far as you're taking, I agree with what you just said, Kurt.
But the machine gun range up in the, near the canal there in the areas of Falmouth and Sandwich, that's their type of thing of needing a permit for something that's unique. But many of the other towns, there's people that are supporting it, organizations like the APCC, saying that that's not the thing to do because it does have to do with the water, the aquifers. So that's just where I'm thinking that noise is an issue, like you say, that we've got to get some noise too with this at the correct point in time, not today or tomorrow, but as part of the strategy plan, because that's really rotten way to run a ship is to ask for remuneration money from a government entity, particularly the military.
Just a footnote to what we said earlier. And I agree with our lobbyists. Congressman Keating and Markey are the keys. Keating, we're in his district. Markey sits on the Senate Environmental and Public Works Committee. It is that committee that Michael Connor, who was nominated by the president for the position of Assistant Army Corps of Engineers, the Assistant Secretary of the Army Corps of Engineers, he had to appear before that committee and be approved in order for his nomination to move on. When he appeared before the committee, Senator Markey impressed upon him the importance of our project. So I think, you know, we have some good guns going for us, but we need to keep on that. And our lobbyist is the key. And the next step for him is to approach Markey to talk directly with the assistant secretary. So, you know, I agree. Like Skip said, we've got to keep the pressure on, but we've got to work closely with the lobbyist and be in sync with them.
So I think Markey is the key because he's helped us before. And this probably wouldn't help, but you know, the Herring River is actually the Herring River project. They're replacing the dike starting in September. And that probably isn't the mitigation, but.
That shows some forward movement on it, if that's true. They're
Yeah,
gonna
it's
replace it
true.
in September?
Yeah,
And I assume when they do that, they'll put in the future floodgates?
yeah, they're doing the whole new bridge. Yeah, the whole new dike. Yes.
That might be worth getting an update and drawing their attention to that, because Herring River Restoration was also in our letter. For whatever
Yes.
reason, they didn't glom onto it, perhaps because they thought it was too far out in time. I don't know. But if we could point to some immediate implementation, I think that might be good.
Janet,
Okay.
Janet, I had shared with the task force back in the fall along that avenue. I called and spoke with the Superintendent Carlson of the National Seashore and discussed that with him, the possibility, you know, of a project of putting some of these spoils in that
Right.
area. And his response was, you know, you're talking about 2-3 years to even get a project like that, you know, approved, on paper approved and moving forward. So that's what I learned about that.
Well,
Janet,
it's a long-term project, but they are starting on the bridge in September. I think it was even in the paper. I mean, it was just at a meeting. And Yeah, I mean, they're redoing the bridge. So that'll get the floodgates going. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't involve giving the Army Corps land, but it's certainly, I mean, I just don't know how that works, but they've got a start date like September 7th or September 9th. And so there's a lot of different things, but at our next meeting, our select board meeting, we're actually signing I gotta think if this is executive session or not. But we have an agreement with the seashore for a land exchange for all the road, different areas that need to be bought, the seashore, the land exchange to raise some roads, to do this, to do that. So it's moving along, but they're definitely starting the bridge, the dike.
So I mean, in terms of mitigation, the Heron River project is at least worth 890 acres of restoration. But the other angle with the Heron River project is Ed Markey was down at the bridge, loudly proclaiming how important this project was. So Ed's well aware of the Heron River project. And I would imagine that the idea that, first of all, Wellfleet, back to Joe's earlier point, Wellfleet shouldn't have to be doing mitigation in the first place. Mitigation really does look like, in my mind, a taking. But even if you don't buy that argument, between the Hilda Trust acreage, Conservation Trust acreage, and the Heron River acreage, anybody that's Markey, obviously would appreciate the fact that we're mitigating substantially more acreage than this little area that we're talking about dredging. And I would think be able to impress upon to take those arguments to the Assistant Secretary of the Army to say, I don't know what's going on from a bureaucratic snafu standpoint, but this makes no sense whatsoever.
And along that line, Kurt, one of the things we have promoted, which officials in the Army Corps were not aware of when they were saying, oh, you can come up with mitigation. The fact that 70% of our town is federal property. They were stunned by that. So that was an illustration to them of how limited we are in terms of giving them land or anything else.
I think it could be as simple, Joe, as Ed Markey saying to the Assistant Secretary, get on with this. This is ridiculous.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And we're moving in that direction.
Joe, I just want to add, if you talk to the county, Ron Bergstrom, I've mentioned this before, and he would just know more about our dredging than Sheila and Mark Forrest. They're all good, but Ron out of Chatham, they've been getting dredging. He knows about Wellfleet, so he's a great guy to talk to.
Is that
Ex-fisherman.
Mark Bernstrom?
No, Ron. R-O-N,
yeah.
Bergstrom, B-E-R-G-S-T-R-O-M.
What is his position, Janet?
I don't know. I looked it up last month because I was going to talk to him.
He's the chair. He's the chair. He's the
I think it changed. He was, but I think it changed. I'm not sure. I'll look it up on my phone while we continue talking.
I'll track him down. Yeah, I'll talk to him. Sure.
But I'm happy. I've got a really good relationship with Mark as well. And I'm thinking,
with all of them.
I'm thinking with Mark, it'd be great to pick his brain about the politics that go on there. If he's got any insight in terms of, he may even know people, in
That's
terms
an
of.
excellent idea, Kurt. Somebody that may know the politics of it.
He was Delahunt's chief of staff for like 18 years. I mean, he was in Washington for 18 years representing the district. He just happens to be now a county commissioner, but he's as knowledgeable as anybody in terms of the inside game. But I do think it still is going to go back to maybe a couple of angles coming at the assistant secretary, whether it's Markey and or others, to say this just doesn't, this is a bureaucratic snafu. It just doesn't make any sense. Let's move on.
Kurt, please share with Mark that he's willing to do it. I'm happy to send him some good documentation on our case and why we have a good case.
So what I'm saying is add Ron Bergstrom.
Yeah.
The three of them work well together, include Sheila. She is our town representative, and send the letter to all three of them.
Yeah.
Or
I'll
communicate with
contact
all
Ron
three.
and Sheila.
Yeah, they're all good, and they all love Wellfleet, so.
Yeah, they do. So I'll reach out to Mark, maybe along the lines of what you're saying, Janet, maybe we could get it on as an agenda item for the county and have the commissioners take a vote, potentially in support, and to get some additional political support. I mean, there's a number of things that they might be able to do.
Yeah. I think Marky is going to be the key, though.
Yep.
Kurt, Chris, what do we have next?
Next thing is reduce sedimentation and maintenance dredging. I sent out that work list. Could summarize it pretty quickly. There were some follow-up action items that we said we would do. Will and I spoke to Barnstable County dredging people just to get a sense of what their equipment is. Obviously, it's geared towards sand, but it could do black mayonnaise. So equipment-wise, that could be done. We also are looking for destinations for black mayonnaise, and Kurt had looked at and maybe identified possible locations where when we get to that stage, we could maybe do thin layer deposition. I don't know, Kurt, you want to summarize that?
Yeah, and also this kind of goes back to what Joe was talking about with his, regarding his conversation with Superintendent Carlson. There's a nice linkage there between the town of Wellfleet and the federal government to the extent that they could use dredge spoils. Granted, it'd take a long time, but this is not going to be the end of being able to place spoils. And I guess the analogy would be, to looking at this as more of a maintenance activity, an ongoing maintenance activity, and to try to get some permitting in place so it's not looked at as a project or as a standalone project. And furthering that relationship with the National Seashore could be additional leverage too with the Army Corps and and this issue of getting the permit for the dredging in the first place. They can use those spoils and certainly will be able to use them in the future. So it's just another angle I think we might be able to exploit here.
And along those lines, there is an upcoming call with the Herring River Restoration Project, just to kind of summarize and find out where their head is and whether they would be a beneficial user of black mayonnaise. Again, this is down the road, but we'll start out. So that call will probably take place in the next week or two.
I've had conversations in the past with Martha Craig, the executive director of Herring River, and she is quite receptive to our situation. We've talked about it and to working with us.
Yeah.
I was very pleased with that response.
Yeah, no, and I got similar reaction trying to coordinate this call with Herring River coming up, and also some emails with John Reel. So everyone's anxious to find a beneficial home for it. So obviously there'll be more on that in the weeks and months.
Chris, there was also those couple of towns on the Cape that were starting the process for the thin layer deposition that we talked with Ken from the Barnstable County Dredge Committee, and he is inquiring about who they're using for environmental consultants, so that possibly we could follow on the heels of that and maybe jump along with a group that's sort of pushing this thin layer deposition through on the Cape and kind of let them lead the way, and then we can come in and use that same kind of process as one of our maintenance projects.
Yeah, Will, I was actually at a conference in December, and one of the presenters at the conference was it's basically a group from Woods Hole, the state of Rhode Island, and the town of Dartmouth. They actually did do a project and they're doing it there for basically for salt marsh restoration, and then using a bunch of techniques to also, while they're doing the salt marsh restoration, reduce mosquito populations and basically integrate mosquito control as part of the effort. I have those contacts, and I'll, when we're talking with Carol, I'll pull all that together and make sure that they're tied into that as well. These folks have offered, the folks down in Rhode Island who actually did the work, are willing to come down to Wellfleet. They will consult with anybody basically at no cost to look at these kind of projects. And they have done the permitting. They have done, gone through the process of getting these things done. And Dartmouth was the first one in Massachusetts to get done. It was Bristol County Mosquito Control that was actually involved in the project in Massachusetts. So we do have some contacts, names, consultants, that could be helpful.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, if you would pull that stuff together so we can share it.
Yep, I'll send you the presentation. I don't know if everybody wants to watch the presentation, or maybe that you would like it. It's a link to their project work, and it's directly in line with what we're doing here. So it's very interesting. I did have one other piece of news, and that had to do with Hillary. I did send the list to Hillary to get her reaction in terms of other potential locations for spoil material. And the issue there is, she just said, we want to, there's other locations that would be of interest to her and to Truro and Provincetown. They're trying to identify areas both in the, I guess it's primarily in Cape Cod Bay, where they could also do spoil deposition. And depending on what the spoils are, that would sort of determine where you'd want to put them. So the black mayo or the custard is a great thin layer deposition for basically a nutrient to be placed to help salt marshes grow. The sand that Kevin's been so worried about that's been collecting by the groin, at the breakwater, that would be ideal for beach renourishment and for other uses. So she's all over that as potentially beginning to integrate what we're trying to do with the dredging maintenance, along with some of her, environmental restoration activities.
Which actually is a good segue into the next agenda item, which is the sand and the shoaling at the breakwater. As Will mentioned, recent discussion with Ken about Barnstable dredging. Clean sand beach nourishment is what they do, so they're all in favor of doing it. The only, I wouldn't even call it a challenge, but a requirement would appear to be permits in place, and then they can schedule it. They had a couple of cancellations because people didn't have their permits. So I would say the biggest item for us, if we want to move ahead on using Barnstable County for that shoaling, is we need to circle back and get the proper permit or permits for it. So I don't know, is that a Hillary thing or somebody else?
Yeah, Hillary could sort of shepherd it, but I think there's a permit in place.
I think that's
Alpha
an
would
open
know
permit.
specifically. Yeah, it's a permit to basically take sand to the area where the road is washing out along Kendrick Ave, right at the corner there at Keller's Corner.
Right,
Keller's
yeah.
Corner.
Yeah, the
So I think
question is, would we be lucky enough that permit allows us to do beach nourishment, where we're talking about essentially taking it from off the breakwater and pumping it back from whence it came, which is up on Indian Neck?
Well, Hillary might be okay moving it across the way to Keller's Corner too. She would know the answer to that question. I'm sure there is a permit in place for Keller's Corner. I don't know if there's anything in place for, taking it up toward, toward Lieutenant Island or Power.
Yeah, and who did you say would?
Hillary.
Oh,
Hillary would know. Hillary will know exactly what the status of those permits are.
I'm going to make, hello.
Alfred, are you on?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
I've
good.
been here a
There's a
while.
guy who really knows the answer too.
No, I don't know the answer. I know the concern. I think if you're going to take the sand from the breakwater and put it over to Keller's Corner, you might as well just put it under the pier, because that's where it's going to end up in 2 years. I mean,
No.
you kind of got to track where it came from. The sand in front of the breakwater needs to go back along Burton Baker Beach, and I think the problem is the ownership of where to put the sand. You can put it on the town beach, but you can't put it on private property unless we can work something out. And I think that if you could get Hillary involved, because she's talked about it, where the beach renourishment is kind of messed up because everybody doesn't have to do it depending on when they built whatever happened. I think that would be a huge thing for the county to come and do. But you don't want to put that on the other side of the harbor. In my
No, I
opinion,
was,
you'd be-
yeah, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. I was kind of throwing it out tongue in cheek because that's where the permit is.
Yeah,
No,
no,
well,
I think everyone envisions putting it back where it came from on
Exactly.
Indian Neck.
Yeah,
but the part that I missed in the beginning of the dredge part of this is, have we given up, not started, or believe it can't happen to put stuff back in the parking lot at the breakwater? I mean, that's all dredge spoil there. Is there any reason why we've given up any thoughts of putting anything there, building it up higher?
No, I wouldn't say we've given up. I think we have it on the list. When you said the breakwater, do you mean like the south side of Chipman's Cove?
Yeah. Yeah, just where the parking lot is, where we drive out to go to the shellfish stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all dredge spoil. I don't understand why. You know, we had a town meeting that bought that for, dredge spoil, a part of it, or turned it over the part of it. I don't remember, because we didn't own all of it. We put some of it on private property back in the 50s or 60s. So, I mean, my real question is, if we're going to have somebody come from the county, and they stand in that thing and say, how much of it do they need? How much can we put there? Then can we get an engineer, an environmentalist, to see whether or not we can get to where, if the county can come fill that up in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, whatever, that we can, get them to come, so that when there is a cancellation, if there is,
Yeah.
we're all set. Because I'm not so sure, depending on where we're dredging in the harbor, that our window is going to be as small. As long as we're not going offshore, our dredge window will probably go right into May.
Yeah, I think winter flounder may be an issue, but my question for you, Alfred, when you talk about putting spoils in the parking lot, are you talking clean sand or black mayo?
I'm talking at least the clean sand, because at that point, somebody will take it for beach renourishment. If you can't put it up as far down the beach as you need to go, you'd be better off pumping it in the parking lot instead of the contractors who do beach renourishment trying to find sand. At that point, they could buy it from the town for less than the sand pit, because the town didn't have to pay to really push it down the beach as far. The advantage of that is, when you get a natural pumped or something that comes out of the harbor for beach renourishment, it lasts probably 40% longer in erosion than regular sand coming out of a cellar hole.
right.
When we do this, when we get the sand from the pier and we put it down to Powers Landing, and it goes around the corner there, and then we put sand, if we don't get far enough, we have other sand come in. The stuff that came from the pier lasts twice as long.
It's the right
the
grain
roads and-
size. Yeah. It's
Because
the right
we
grain
got
size.
everything.
And that may facilitate a permit for that, and then we would be ready if they had a cancellation. So far as the parking lot, it is on the list for the black mayonnaise possible dewatering, but that's a totally different issue. You have a good point about clean sand as an interim destination.
And
Well,
that
depending on the size of what you got over there, if it takes a longer time for the black mayonnaise to drain off, does it matter?
No, but I think the issue there, Alfred, is that the black mayo is ideal as far as a nutrient. So it's really the best place for it is in one of these marshes where they need material. They're going to need material in Duck Creek. They're going to need material Herring River. Probably going to need some material with the little marsh that's right next to Powers Landing. Anyway, what I think Chris has done, which is very helpful, is compile this list so you can kind of look at where the locations you can drop stuff and where the locations you could get stuff from, and begin to put together a sustainable, planned program where, we could have, for example, a master permit in place that's just like the permit we have now to take stuff from under the pier and put it up at Keller's Corner, and just get this thing working in a holistic, sustainable way rather than, ad hoc. This thing hasn't been looked at for like 20 or 30 years. It's a mess now, and we're just trying to figure it out. But going forward, the county and the state certainly want us to have a plan in place, as far as dredge maintenance. And this is the backbone of what I think is a really, potentially a great plan.
I don't disagree, but if you're gonna deal with a county, we've got to find out how far each stage goes before you have to put another pump on it, and what that cost is.
Right.
Because it may actually be cheaper to spend the money to buy some of the stuff with the county, being another pump, an inline pump. Because
the cost of the inline pump to increase the distance is really pretty modest. It's like an extra couple of dollars per cubic yard. Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but without the pump, it's about $10 a cubic yard, and it goes to maybe 13 if they have to add a booster pump in order to take it upwards of 1.5 miles.
Yeah, but if we pay $13 a yard for discussion.
Yeah, go ahead.
And we're putting it someplace that has a benefit, where we just paid to have dredging done, which is a huge benefit to the harbor, but we get no benefit out of the spoil.
Right.
So I mean, and in Kurt's logic, I guess, and I'm not putting words in his mouth, but I mean, if we're going to use it for that, it really isn't that much more money. You put a pump in the middle for the outcome, and I believe that if you're going to use this for marshes, you're going to need another pump. And then
yeah, are you talking black mayonnaise for marshes?
Yes.
Yeah, depending on the destination, we probably would need the pump, but like I said, that's pretty modest to get rid of black mayonnaise and provide thin layer deposition. I can add a little section to this. That little work list I put together is focused on black mayonnaise. I can add a little section about clean beach nourishment because it does have a slightly different nuance and timetable. But the key thing, if we want to do something on the shoaling at the end of the breakwater, is permits and or destination. And the idea of maybe an interim destination in the parking lot is a good one.
The other question that Hillary had, Chris, was centered around what the character of the bottom is, where it's been dredged, potentially either in the channel or in the inner harbor. Does it actually get down to sand, or is it still muck?
I would say in general it gets down to sand, but there's still a layer that, because it floats in, and especially in the north access channel, there's quite a bit of sediment dispersion with the tides. So I'd say there's definitely a layer in the north access channel.
Okay.
And it's going to build up. It's the dead end of our tide there where it goes, the duckbill restricts it, and Duck Creek restricts it as well.
But that's more of a reason, in my opinion, to use a hydraulic dredge, because at that point you'll suck all that out, which you'll never get it with a bucket.
Right.
And then the quality of our water is going to come way up because you won't have the sediment stirred up every time the tide moves.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. Using hydraulic is beneficial for any number of reasons, certainly cost, but we just have to find a home for the spoils.
I'd like to refer back to, I think what is really important here, identifying, as has been said, potential sites. if we look down the road, when we made an inquiry of our engineer last spring about how long he thought before we would have to do maintenance dredging, he estimated about 4 years. Now, we all know through the grant process that we wrote to get the 2.5 million from the state, it's elaborate and they want details and they want locations and all the specifics. So if we are going to be in a position in a few years to apply for funding for our maintenance dredging, we should have our ducks in order about possible locations and how they can be utilized.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when you get a chance, take a look at the spreadsheet because we have a section about possible locations and destinations. And I believe some of them would be available sooner rather than later. And by that, there may be something up around Powers Landing, which we could implement sooner. Herring River location would probably be further out in time. So I agree, we should expand the list. If anyone has additional items to add to it, just get them to me and I'll update the list accordingly. This is the list that I sent out the other day as follow-up.
Yep, and I forwarded it to Hillary too, and she's got ideas too, Joe. And the thing that's beautiful is that, the conservation agent is now engaged in trying to help us. And, she's very, very familiar with the permitting that's required. And she's, in a sense, driving that part of the process. So I think it's great. I think we got a great working group here, and she's really interested in helping out here.
Kurt, I note on the dewatering locations, one of them is the Autobahn. Do they have a need for this kind of stuff? Have you or Hillary had discussions with them at all?
I haven't.
Is that something you'd be willing to pursue and talk with them?
Sure. Yep. Yeah, I can talk to them. And I mean, Hillary, what probably would be smart is to have, see if Hillary would be willing to attend one of our meetings and, bring the ideas that she's got with regard to locations and kind of get everybody on the same page, develop the list and start to really figure out what we need to do to get this plan in place so that 4 years from now, when we want to do it, we know where it's going and what it's going to cost.
Well, Hillary, I think that's a good idea, but Hillary may not be too happy about the first dewatering location, the Indian Neck Beach parking lot.
Well, she's pretty practical. I mean, at the end of the day, we've got a list of opportunities and locations, and you got to vet them all. They all have pluses and minuses, and the spoils are different. There's a lot of moving parts there.
Yeah, I agree.
Sometimes life is made up of the least bad.
So just with all the storms and like the breach at Duck Harbor, can this material be used? Is it proven or scientifically possible for it to be used at Duck Harbor parking lot? And I mean, did you guys all see the video of waves coming into Duck Harbor parking lot?
Yes.
Yeah, but I think you raised last time, structurally, the black mayonnaise really doesn't have any value. It's detrimental. It's
Okay.
valued in nutrients.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Okay. All right.
Now, if we said that a thin layer deposition would smother all the mosquitoes out there, we'd be onto something.
Well, wait till you see this. Wait till you see this video. Wait till you see this presentation. I'll send you that. I'm going to send a link to.
All right.
Yeah, but I'm going to be negative for a second. How far is it to Duck Harbor parking lot from the harbor? How many miles?
Well, you have to go around, right?
Yeah.
I mean, these are all good ideas, but I'm not so sure.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. Were we talking Duck Harbor parking lot or Indian Neck?
I said Duck Harbor.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think before you get the cart before the horse, you've got to find out what your maximum distance is to get rid of something at $5, $10, $20, $30, $50 a yard.
Right.
I mean, there needs to be a circle drawn from Wellfleet Harbor so that
Yeah.
depending on the energy that goes into something, you also know the cost before you start.
Yeah.
Right.
And
'Cause
also,
I'm
what
going to be
obstruction,
negative. To ship this stuff down to the Audubon may be great environmentally, but can we afford to do it? I'm
well,
not saying we can't. I'm just saying you need that number.
yeah, well, in some cases, we may have to dewater it somewhere. And actually, I think you had mentioned Indian Neck parking lot as dewatering. And then dewater it there and then possibly send it on to its destination. But these are all possible scenarios that need to be fleshed out.
I want to be very upfront. I'm not opposed to going anywhere. I just think that you have to find out what it's going to cost each time you have to
Yeah,
put another pump on to push it.
Or to transport it by truck.
Yeah, or barge. There's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
And the volumes, what volume do you have in what location? We don't, we've got to start to look at those things too. It's going to take us 4 years to figure it out.
Well, we may want to get there before that. So if it's a smaller volume to keep out of it, we can.
Yeah. No, I think it's all good. And the fact that Hillary's willing to get engaged is really, really fabulous.
Hey, Chris, what's next?
next one is schedule the next meeting. February 7th is a Monday. I didn't check. Is that before or on top of whatever we have President's Day?
That President's Week would be the next week, like around the 14th. So the 7th would be good.
Actually, President's is the 21st.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So with that said, do we want the 7th or the 14th?
Probably no more by the 14th, but either one is good.
Yeah. Well,
You could wait too and see if Joe or anybody talks to when you hear from the lobbyist and Markey and all that too, if they get back to us soon. Do it sooner.
all right, well, shall we schedule it tentatively for the 7th then?
Well, that's what, 3 weeks?
Should be 4, I think.
4, yeah.
Yeah. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. It's 4 weeks. Like I said, 4 weeks or 5, whatever people's preference is.
If we go 5, it'd probably give us a little more, we'd probably know more information at that point. But either one is fine.
Yeah. All right, well, let's go the 14th.
Unless Janet has plans for Valentine's Day.
I was going to say.
This is my social life, Zoom.
I should have said other plans for Valentine's Day.
Which
Yeah.
I'll tell you, these Zoom meetings are way easier and less complicated than any kind of a relationship.
Janet, you look like you're on a chalet in the Alps.
Oh,
I
geez.
wished Colorado.
All right, quick show of hands for the 14th.
Either.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
so we're good on the 14th. That takes us to the next hard item, a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is that Kurt?
Yep.
Second?
There's no second. Everybody wants to stay.
Sorry, Kevin, I was looking down. All right, all those in favor. Alfred, your vote.
Aye.
Kurt,
Aye.
Kevin,
Aye.
Skip,
Aye.
Joe,
Hi,
Chris, aye, wow. Unanimous.
thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks. See you guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.